everyone, this is Jean from the Inky Studio, and today I'm going to be showing you my process for mass making fabric clusters. It's a project that I like to do a lot of at one time because it takes a lot to get together. I usually divide all my fabrics into color families, and I have some green, some blue, and some pink here. I also collect fabrics that I call neutral prints, and they're sort of black and white prints, and then a lot of plain fabrics with very little prints on them. I like to make strips out of my fabric, and one thing I'd like to point out too is I usually you can see there's the selvage there of the fabric, and I like to tear a strip of that off at the beginning, and I save those selvages. Might be able to see it better in this piece, and it's that side of the fabric that is where it doesn't fray, and it's a little bit thicker than the rest of the fabric. I save all those, and then I collect lace. Of course, no piece is too small. All kinds of bits and pieces that come out off of larger projects. And we'll work with the selvages later, and I'll show you what I do with them. And so if I have a new piece of cloth, then I tear strips that are around 1.5 inches to 1 inch. Different widths. Sometimes I do them at 2 inches. And just do a variety of those pieces, and then I tear or cut them off in squares, and you can of course use scissors to do this, so you don't have to tear everything. But I try to get different sizes of bits and pieces together. I do quite a few of the plain neutral shades because I use probably more of those than I will of the other ones. And once I have it all torn up or close to it, I begin to assemble them. So I start with the base of neutrals, either plain neutrals, or I often also add a little bit of the printed neutral in there, but I start with that kind of a base or a plain color. Sometimes I do put a plain color behind the back, but the front piece is always sort of like the eye-catching piece, the one that has the print on it or the color that I want to use for that particular batch of ephemera clusters. And here I have a printed neutral, and I just start to layer them down, and I probably layer down about 3 or 4 layers, and my goal in putting them down is to make sure that each layer is seen somewhere. That's how I like to do it, that it peeks out someplace. So here I have about 3 background layers, and then the one more brightly colored one in the front. And then I just pin them together. I do not sew them at this time. And I go through, and sometimes a fabric will have a real nice little floral print or print of an animal or something that can be you can cut it down to really make it like the decoration for that cluster. And plain, I don't have a lot of plain fabric, but that does come in quite handy. I have some fabrics that read like they're plain, a plain color, like that green print there I put behind the blue flowers. A variety of textures is also nice. I have a little bit of that one piece there that's a little thicker than the other pieces. I try to make at least 2 of each kind of assembly, because why recreate the wheel too many times. So that's what I do is I make two at least. And then I just take pieces of lace and I try not to think it through too much. My initial reaction is just to make sure the lace doesn't blend too much with the rest of it, there might be some contrast by adding the lace. And I just then pin that onto each of my clusters. The lace can get changed out or rearranged or whatever. Now we're going to use, I got some ink here. These are permanent inks, and I really like the VersaFine. That's one of my favorite ink pads to use, especially for small details. And this is just a strip of muslin that I tore off, and I'm just going to go through and I'm just going to take these little tiny stamps and just going to stamp up a few of those. I'm also got a few of these larger stamps for a bit of a larger design. So you don't want to use the distress inks, you do want to use a permanent ink pad. And then I usually iron these later on to really set the ink. And I fray the sides if that's what that's the look I like. Now here is the seam binding, and what I like to do about this one is I like to stamp words on it because it won't fray, and it's I don't know, it just seems like maybe a fabric tape of some sort. It's usually a little thicker material than just a plain muslin. I don't have word stamps, so I have to create my own. So now we're going to assemble them. Now, if you don't want to use a sewing machine, here's some different ways that you can connect all the layers together. And of course, a real obvious one is a button. You can sew that on, making sure that you're catching all the layers together. Or it could be a charm. It could be a bead. Just something that you're going to sew on and then sew through all the layers. If you don't want to sew at all, you can glue. And what I like to do then is I take a piece of paper ephemera, make sure that I pick a spot where all the fabrics come in contact. I glue down my ephemera, and then right behind it I do all the gluing of the different layers. Now this works really good, especially if you have fabric tack, because glue sometimes will seep through and make a spot, and by covering it up with the ephemera you can avoid that. But I chose to sew, and I sewed around the first layer all the way around like a square to connect all of them together. Now I'm just going to decorate them. Sometimes I use a piece of paper ephemera, which is the easiest and quickest way to go, because all you got to do now is just glue that ephemera on. I did iron these before I sewed them because my material was kind of wrinkled, so that kind of helps too. Here's one of the words I made on the seam binding, or on the selvage of the fabric. But I think I'm going to use this little bird. It's such a sweet, sweet little stamp. I try to place it somewhere where we can still see all the different other layers peeking through. And I'm going to sew this on because muslin, I think, would really show the glue a little too much. And I'm using a contrasting thread, but you definitely could use a thread that blends better, or you can go back to your sewing machine and sew it on. I'm going to put the lace behind it. Now that's why I do not glue or sew the lace on until the last moment, because I don't know where I'll be placing it. Here I just stitched around, and I will just knot it off at the back a few times. And see, I'm trying to think what I did here. So I'm using one of the words I made. And the nice thing about having sewn it with a machine together is that I don't have to worry about where I place my ephemera or whatever it is I'm putting on top of the cluster as a center to catch the eye. And you don't have to, sew all the way around it. You can just sew across the top like I'm doing here. Just enough to catch everything. And you can also go in with some glitter glue. Usually doesn't seep through too badly. But again, that selvage of that fabric's thicker than muslin. Sometimes your fabric will just have a real pretty design on it, maybe an animal or a flower or something of that nature, and it really doesn't need too much of anything. So I'm just going to add a little bit of lace, and that's it. So here we have all the ones that I have made. I thank you so much for viewing. I hope I gave you a few tips that you could use and some inspiration to mass make yours, because getting all those supplies out, you may as well get a few done. Thanks a lot, and we will talk to you real soon.